I'm Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the treasurer of the Jewish Study Center, and I want to welcome everyone to this class about Judaism Disrupted, which is a discussion with Rabbi Michael Strassfeld, who just wrote that book. And let me say in the beginning that this class is co-sponsored by the speaker series from the Farbrengen Chavarah, which is a local synagogue here in the Washington, D.C. area. As treasurer, I want to tell you that our classes are free, but we do have expenses, and therefore we encourage people to make donations. We don't require it, but we do encourage it. And if you want to make a donation, go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and you click on donate, and you can donate via your credit card or your PayPal account, or you can send us a check. If you click on sending a check, the website will tell you where to mail it to. Okay, now a few technical points. As you realize, this proceeding is being recorded. After the program is over, I will edit so that the stuff that came before the actual program began will be deleted. I'll post it on YouTube, and then I'll send an email to all the students who have registered, whether you've attended or not. Everybody who's registered will get an email telling them where the recording is. The email may also have some extra information about Michael Strassfeld or about the book, etc. Also, someone did enable the closed captioning. So if you want to see the words going by, and it's not exactly accurate, but it's pretty accurate, you can use closed captioning. Everybody is being muted, but we do want your questions and your comments. Please write the questions or comments in the chat box addressed to everyone. Sometimes you write a comment, someone will write a comment over your comment, same thing with questions. So do it to everyone. There will be a opportunity at the end of the session for Q&A from the audience. So we'll be looking at what you put in the chat box and asking questions to Michael Strassfeld, to Rabbi Strassfeld. I think that's all that I have to say. So now, since this is being co-sponsored by the Farbrengen speaker series, I'll turn it over to Sue Hochstetter, who is the organizer of the speaker series. Sue, you're on.
Thanks, Jerry. And don't worry, everyone trips over my last name.
All the time.
So welcome to everybody. We're so glad to see all of you and are looking forward to a great program tonight. I wanted to say that this, we thank Lucy for having come up with the idea for this program, and thank the Study Center, the fabulous Study Center, for co-sponsoring. And thank you so much to Michael for being here, and for Chuck and Lucy to being part of the program. So Lucy suggests this as part of our speaker series program, which Jerry mentioned. And I did want to say, Farbrengen's program, I did want to say a few words to you about Farbrengen and our speaker series, and then we'll get on with the program. Farbrengen is a community very close to my heart. It's a community devoted to Torah, to social activism, and to community service. And that's what it says if you go to the website. But I want to tell you that personally, I find it to be warm and caring, dynamic and innovative community. Please visit us on our website at farbrengen.org. Maybe someone will put that in the chat while I'm talking. And please come to services. We have services on Shabbat, and we have services on all the holidays, and everybody is welcome. And our speaker series highlights topics of interest and highlights Farbrengeners doing interesting things. And I just want to tell you, our next speaker series will be July 9th. You're all invited. And we're going to be three Farbrengen artists will be sharing their work with us: Judy Beth Green, Alan Hirsch, and Rick LaRue. And you can see more about that on our website. Okay, so let's get to the program. So we do have interesting members at Farbrengen, and Lucy and Chuck are two of our interesting members who have read Michael's book. And I don't know if I said this, but Michael, we are so thrilled that you're here. Who have read Michael's book and thought about questions that would delve deeper that might be of interest to all of us. So they're going to interview Michael, and then we're going to open it up for questions to open up to everyone. So let me just tell you a few words about them. And so Rabbi Charles Feinberg has been a rabbi for almost 50 years, and he's worked in several states and the colony of the District of Columbia, where his last congregational job was with Adas Israel. He's also one of the founders of the Interfaith Action for Human Rights, which advocates in Maryland, DC, and Virginia for correction systems that focus on rehabilitation and on successful reentry of returning citizens. Wouldn't that be nice if our systems were all like that, our correction systems? He's a member of Tifereth Israel as well as Farbrengen, and married to the lovely Krina, has 2 kids, and pardon me? I'm sorry, couldn't hear you, Chuck. Looked like Chuck was trying to say something.
3 children.
3, oh, I'm so sorry.
All right.
3 children, each one a mitzvah, and each one a blessing, and 2 grandchildren, correct? Yeah. And Dr. Lucy Steinitz, who's going to introduce Rabbi Strassfeld, belongs to a noble profession of social work and has spent the first half of her career in doing social work in the US. And then, as she says in her biography, she got a little bored and convinced her husband and 2 kids to go off on adventures in Africa with her, and spent 17 years there in Nambia and Ethiopia, and still travels. And this week, in fact, she's off to Zimbabwe. She works for Catholic Relief Services, peace building and justice for those traumatized. And so happy to have you both doing some questions. And before I turn over to Lucy, I'm just, in case some people just came on the last minute or two, just remind people, if you have questions, we will be monitoring your questions. Please put them in the chat room. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks, Sue, and thanks to your pup who is joining you on the screen. Michael, yesher koach on your book. It's really good to see you again. You and I go back over a half century to the early days of Chavarat Shalom in Boston. I loved the way you led prayer services back then, infusing Hasidic melodies with insights and stories and new practices, much as you continue to do via your weekly newsletters, something I gladly recommend to everyone. I'm putting it in the chat. You too can subscribe. They're free and they're always insightful. This in addition to your book. But back to the beginning. So you hail from Dorchester, Massachusetts, where your father started out as an as a rabbi of an Orthodox shul, and then the family moved to Marblehead, where he took over a conservative synagogue. So movement within the Jewish community is a family tradition. When we met 50 plus years ago, you had just finished your master's degree in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies at Brandeis University, and you were embarking on what is probably still your most famous work as co-editor of the Jewish Catalog, all 3 volumes, which is a do-it-yourself guide to modern Jewish living. You have written several other books since then and multiple articles, most of them after you moved to New York, where, from 1979 to 1982, you served as chairperson of the National Chavarot Committee, the coordinating body of independent Chavarot in North America. Then in 1982, you took a leadership role at Congregation Anshe Chesed on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which revitalized that place from a rundown synagogue, I remember, to a center of Jewish innovation and multiple chavarot. You were ordained as a rabbi 9 years later at the age of 41 from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And then, beginning 10 years after that, you became rabbi of the Society for the Advancement of Judaism in New York. It's a congregation that's known for its creative approach to Judaism since its establishment by Mordechai Kaplan back in 1922. Although you officially rewired, I prefer that term to retired, 8 years ago, you were still busy as executive director of the Jewish Counterculture Oral History Project, as well as writing and lecturing, for example, with Judaism Disrupted. And you have a wonderful wife, 5 children, and 3 grandchildren to keep you active. So we're especially glad that you could spend this time with us this evening. So with that background, we're going to turn this over to you for a brief overview, and then we'll have questions. 4 of them to begin with between Rabbi Chuck Feinberg and myself, and then, as Sue mentioned, we'll open up the discussion to others. I'm confident we're going to have a great discussion. So Michael, for your overview, tell us why Judaism has disrupted and what you recommend we do about it.
Thanks a lot, Lucy. It's really particularly special to be together, even if it's only on Zoom. And thank everybody for bringing in the Jewish Studies Center and all the participants who joined together for what I hope will be an interesting conversation. So I just want to say a few words at the beginning, and as Lucy said, move to questions from Lucy and Chuck, and then for opportunity for people to ask more questions. So, and picking up with, in a way, with what Lucy was talking about, 50 years ago, it's 50 years ago this year, a group of young people, including myself, edited the Jewish catalog, whose tagline, "A do-it-yourself kit," as Lucy mentioned, described our desire to show people how to embrace a vibrant Judaism for themselves. It touched a nerve, selling over 300,000 copies. My new book, Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century, addresses a different question, not how to build a Jewish life, but why. Or more to the point, why bother? While most Jews these days feel proud of being Jewish, many people find its rituals and institutions irrelevant. This is my 9th book and has been the most original and most challenging. I wrote this book because my life has been all about Judaism, and I today am worried about its future. A few weeks ago, I was at a gallery in Soho in New York for a panel of artists talking about the intersection of being an artist and being Jewish. Each of the panelists introduced themselves, and one talked of his art and then said, "I am a good Jew," and then quipped, I was kidding." The next artist talked of her art and said, "I am a mediocre Jew." And then the gallery owner, who was also Jewish, said, "I am a bad Jew." It was clear that all of them defined being a good Jew as attending synagogue and observing the rituals of Judaism, things they felt disinterested in or incompetent in doing. For me, this summarized the category mistake that was the impetus for my book. The purpose of Judaism is not to make us better Jews, but to help us become good people, offering wisdom and practices to take the most precious gift that we have been given, our lives, and live them with purpose. For many people, like these artists, Judaism is mostly a bunch of rituals disconnected from anything of importance to them. There are also, I have found, many Jews who participate in Jewish life, not just those who stand on the margins, but who participate and wonder whether there is more to Judaism than what they experience. Others feel mostly disconnected from the prayers in the Siddur, the prayer book, or from the act of praying altogether. Today, often the established Jewish community, both in its religious and secular spheres, asserts that Jewish continuity depends on enough Jews doing enough Jewish things, like lighting Shabbat candles or attending a Passover Seder. I disagree. Judaism isn't about doing the things that only Jews do, such as observing rituals or holidays. Its purpose is not to fulfill the commandments in order to receive a Jewish merit badge from the great scoutmaster in the sky. Judaism does not exist to make God happy, nor is it a method to get rewarded by God with a trouble-free life. The purpose of Judaism is to help us live our lives to the utmost. It is about bringing goodness into our lives and into the lives of everyone we meet. It is about bringing justice to people we will never meet, but with whom we share this planet. It is about being good caretakers of that same planet. Today, we live in disruptive times. Almost 2,000 years ago, there was another such moment, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The genius of rabbinic Judaism was creating a Judaism that was portable, that Jews could take with them wherever the winds of misfortune would carry them around the globe. Today, we need something different. In the open society in which we live and thrive, we need a Judaism that is permeable, enabling us to interact with the world around us, that is more inclusive and more accessible. Increasingly, that world is not just neighbors or friends, but includes people who are members of our own family. This understanding has led me to reject some of the forms of rabbinic Judaism that have formed the basic paradigm of Jewish life up until the modern period. I no longer understand Judaism as a system of law and obligation. I have discarded the paradigm of dividing the world into dualities, men and women, permitted and forbidden, and Jew and non-Jew, which is a foundational understanding of rabbinic Judaism. Let me be clear. My purpose in writing the book isn't to save Judaism. It is to share with you the principles and values of Judaism that I have discovered over a lifetime engagement with the tradition, from the modern orthodoxy in which I grew up to what I call the radical traditionalism that now defines my practice. Radical traditionalism rejects much of the beliefs, paradigms, and practices of rabbinic Judaism. But radical traditionalism draws upon sources from both the rabbinic past and the mystical traditions of Judaism, so that this new Judaism is deeply connected to the past. As I reread rabbinic texts, I try to excavate the core meanings of practices that have been covered over by centuries of often obfuscating accretions. Halakha, usually translated Jewish law, is a spiritual path related to the original meaning of its root, to go. Each of us is on our life's journey. Halakha suggests that there is wisdom and awareness that can help us on our way. It is the spiritual practice of the Jewish people, honed over centuries of discussions, debates, and developments. Like any practice, it requires a regular commitment. You cannot get the benefits of working out if you only go to the gym 3 times a year. For our lives, we can imagine a system that does not focus on fulfilling a commandment, yet which still appreciates the importance of actually performing mitzvot. something happens in the doing that is different from just thinking about the values underlying the commandment. Judaism would remain a practice of doing, not just thinking or believing. And the obligation is a self-commitment, because you believe that a spiritual life requires both practice and discipline. All this requires a re-envisioning of Judaism. My book outlines 11 core principles with simple practices, some traditional and others brand new, to help bring an awareness into our lives, cultivating qualities such as gratitude for our blessings, compassion for fellow human beings, and a sense of satisfaction rather than an endless striving for what we think we lack. In my book, I broadly redefine rituals as a series of awareness practices that encourage us to cultivate inner qualities such as gratitude, generosity, and satisfaction, or to help us be conscious of our place and responsibility in the universe. We are to live lives of intentionality, of kavanah, because any interaction has the potential to be meaningful. Let me give you one specific example. Many Jews have a mezuzah on their doorpost, this little container which contains a scroll. Often it becomes wallpaper, invisible after it is hung. And I suggest that a possible practice that is each morning as you get ready to leave home to go outside, to make that transition from home to outside, from home to work, that you take a moment and pause at the doorpost. Maybe you kiss the mezuzah if you want, or you just take that moment. And in a sense, what you're doing then is saying, I want to take a moment before I begin my day and set a spiritual intention for the day, just in a moment. And really what I'm saying is, remember to take your keys, your cell phone, and a spiritual intention. And that could be just to, I want to, see more of the be cognizant more of the wonders of nature. Or it could be specific. I know I have a difficult meeting coming up today, and I want to carry with me an extra measure of patience into the day. I want to say that Judaism isn't only being disrupted in our times. Judaism also disrupts us, challenging us to play a role in the continuing unfolding creation of the world. For more than 3,000 years, the Jewish people has engaged in a discussion of how to live a life of meaning. My book, Judaism Disrupted, is for anyone seeking to find within our tradition new ways to unroll the Torah scroll to find meaning in this contemporary moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be here. I guess I've been elected to offer up the first question, and appreciate your very concise but very thorough introduction to your book. And I think you covered a lot of the basics of the book. One of the things that impressed me in the book was how important Hasidism seems to, Hasidic thinking, Hasidic stories are important to you, included that in many ways in the book. And I guess if you could talk a little bit of why it's important to you. I think people perceive Hasidism as being a very rigid ritual practice and something that you just now discounted in some ways. So I was just wondering, what about Hasidism is important for you and what should be important to us?
Right, and you pointed out a key point, which is what I think I find, and others who have become interested in Hasidism find, is that it's really the early period of Hasidism, which where in some sense they were on the cutting edge of Jewish life, and Hasidism has moved from that position, as it were, to being on kind of the far right, the ultra-Orthodox wing of Jewish life, and in some ways is the group that's most opposed to modernity, seeing it as a challenge to their life and their values. But at its beginning, it was controversial in the traditional community. It was attacked as, you know, being kind of heretical at its time. And I think for me, there's a couple of things that I find really important and powerful, and basically why it's important is because it's Hasidism. I mean, I should say 18th century, began in the 18th century for people that are not familiar, a kind of pietistic movement, but it is clearly within the Jewish tradition, and it sees Judaism through a spiritual lens. So rather than looking for sources for contemporary spirituality only from looking to Eastern mysticism as translated into the American scene, here is a genuine Jewish source for spirituality and mysticism. So that's one basic piece. But I think the two things that I would emphasize is Hasidism's stress on kavanah, on intention, and it didn't say, oh, you don't actually have to do the commandments, and that way it stayed traditional even at the beginning, but it moved from the rabbinic emphasis on doing the commandments correctly to that intention was really the key aspect of what the religious life was about. And I think that's very much kavanah is a Jewish term that very fits well with spirituality. And then briefly is the other important piece of Hasidism was it was also a break from earlier Jewish mysticism, which was often very ascetic in its outlook, and in that sense very, sort of medieval, that seeing that the world or the material should be avoided, that the spiritual and the material were enemies, were opposites, and instead Hasidism said, probably because of its theology, longer conversation, but said that holiness, Kedushah, can be found anywhere. And you could do holy acts not just by praying or studying Torah, but anything you do had the potential to be holy. And you could find holiness, and for them, you could say you could find sparks of the divine in every act in life, not just the things that you might obviously call religious, but and for me, that's a really important definition. To broaden the definition of what religion and spirituality is about isn't just keeping kosher, going to synagogue, but it's how you speak to people, how you interact with your neighbors, how you involve yourself in social justice, et cetera, all those things are equally holy acts. And I think that's a really important paradigm for this moment.
Thanks for that. I'll turn it over to Lucy. Lucy has a question.
All right, a different question. So you identify certain precepts and teachings and halachot that seem to you to be the most relevant in a post-disrupted world. But Michael, how do you respond to people who see this as a pick and choose Judaism? Like, you can select what you like from the menu, and I'll pick what I like from the menu. Doesn't this destroy continuity? Doesn't this destroy solidarity and cohesion with other Jews?
Look, I think you're right. It's a challenge, but it actually it just struck me that it goes back to the catalog. You know, we called it the Jewish catalog, and what a catalog means, it's a bunch of things, and you choose from it what you want. And one of the reasons I think the catalog was appealing, it didn't say, okay, here's what you have to do to be a good Jew. You know, here, A, B, C, D, E, you know, all the way through Z. It didn't say that. It said, here is our Jewish life. We're going to make it accessible. We're going to, if you're interested in building a sukkah, a booth on the fall holiday, here's how to do it. But we're not going to say you have to do all these things. There was, the words good Jew never appear there. And that's an interesting echo with the story of the artist. Look, I think the other piece is we live in disruptive times, things of great change. And in such moments, I think there are a lot of different experiments. I think that was true again around the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. There were a variety of sects, of different groups, some of which we probably don't even know, and others, like Christians, became their own religion. It was a time of great ferment, and I think we are at the same moment. And I have faith that over time, the Jewish people, as I think it's done in the past, will decide what the practice should be. Though I must say, I think it's possible, and maybe ideally would be that there's not just one practice, but there'll be multiple practices. But the difference between now is, you know, so I have my practice, and I think the people over there are too fanatic, and the people over there aren't serious enough. The only people who are right are the people standing with me. But what if there was a real acceptance of pluralism and saying we have different ways to do it, but we're all part of this enterprise, and we do things differently, but we're all in this tradition. And instead of judging other people, we say, you know, let diversity flower. And long after all of us who are on this call are gone, you know, we'll find out what will be. But that's, I think that experimentation and that working things out, I would choose that over the danger of, you know, everybody making Shabbos for themselves, as a word. That it's so different that we can't, you know, we don't recognize each other as being part of the same Jewish people.
Let me just follow up a bit on that. The business of the smorgasbord and people choose what they want. But isn't this not, and you seem to indicate this is a new problem or new challenge, but isn't this really go back to the beginning of emancipation, when Jewish people became citizens, and that gave, you know, they were no longer totally bound to the community and its mores. And they had a choice, and that's basically any Jew who lives in a democratic society has a choice, you know, to opt out entirely or to choose what he or she wants to do Jewishly. So I guess I'm a little puzzled by your sense that this is a unique time. I was wondering if you could elaborate better about why you think now is different.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, I agree with you that I would 100% agree that this challenge began with the Enlightenment. And just like now, you know, scholars say, you know, Rabbinic Judaism took, you know, 5 or 6 centuries to become what it is. You know, in the beginning, there were like 25 guys who were like, that was it for Rabbinic Judaism. And it was only many centuries later where it became the dominant form. So I think that's I agree that the challenge, there's a deep challenge to modernity, and you could look at, Judaism in the 20th century and the denominational response, which would be, okay, we have to change, reform. No, you're doing too much, conservative, et cetera, to oversimplify. And either, it kind of worked in the 20th century, but I think it's no longer working, or it only looked like it was working. And again, some scholars many years from hence, will fight over that question. I think what's in some ways, perhaps it's just the changes in modernity have been underlined. And we now live in an open society, and that's a very, very different world than the world that Judaism was coming out of in the pre-modern times. And I think that is broadly the challenge, because I think parts of the Jewish community are afraid of the open society, and in terms of the intermarriage issue, to call it that, and yet I think everybody in the liberal community wants to live in the open society. We don't want to go back to some form of ghetto or where we aren't equal with everybody else. So I think I think what's been happening has accelerated the challenge. Maybe let me put it like that. That it's now it's really much more open, not perfect, of course, but really much more open. And how are we going to do this, right? And that's partly the reason I reject the paradigm of the dualities. Also because I think a lot of people feel, and I think correctly, that dualities lead to hierarchies. And that's, again, part of what we want to have is a more open, more accepting, less judgment of people. And we're still figuring out how to create that and how to live that.
I have a question for Chuck first. Was that your second question, or was it a follow-up to the first one? Because it's not the second question that we had thought you were going to ask.
That's correct. So I'll ask my other question after you do this. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, let's be wild and just ask some questions. We're disrupting the plan.
Yeah, but it works. You see, we're flexible. There's no duality here.
Right.
All right, and I'm going to ask a double question now that I've got my time. So, Michael, as you know, I'm a much more secular Jew than you are, and the heart of my affiliation with Judaism really lies with history and with community. So I identify with and I agree with many of your core principles that you described: the ethics, the social justice, the awareness, and the caring for the planet. But does one have to be Jewish for that? Can't Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Baha'i also adhere to the same principles? Do you even need God? And what role does history and community play for you in Judaism Disrupted?
That was like about 20 questions. All right, let's see if I can do this quickly. Try and answer many of them. The God thing, I feel that the notion that there's something larger than myself in the universe, that the universe isn't really just about me, despite the fact that's actually how I experience the universe. I think that's an important spiritual practice. And whether you call that God, whether you call it the universe, whether you call it Gaia, to me, that's an important notion. I can't remember all the questions, but I think, look, it's like all these hard questions, what about everybody, going off on their own, et cetera, et cetera. So the same thing. Yes, all religions have values, have principles, have practices, and there are people who, would say they're not religious, and they would say they're not even spiritual, but who strive to live a deeply moral life. I think but I don't need to claim that Judaism is the only way to get there, right? It's the only path. In fact, as a pluralist, I deny that, and one of the, I think, pointed pieces in the book is I identify idolatry not as worshiping money and fame, et cetera, but it's claiming that you know the truth, you know what God is and what God wants, and everybody else is wrong, that you have the truth and everybody else doesn't. I think that's idolatry, because I believe that God's not knowable. And the moment that you say, I know, and I'm right, and everybody else is wrong, that's a form of idolatry. That's what the golden calf was about, was taking, something that was molten and fixing it in one image and saying, this and only this is your God Israel. And it's a mistake that I think there's a variety of mistakes of false paths in religion, and this is a main one. And it leads to, the religious wars, crusades, et cetera, and it's actually, as I say, it's a form of idolatry, which is, in the Torah, a really large mistake. But I think there are lots of ways to do this, and I don't think, I don't need to try and prove my way is better. It is a way, and why choose this way than a different way? For me, it's the way I grew up in. But there's no magic answer. I think that's the point in some ways. That's another problem with fundamentalism. This is the answer. No, there isn't an answer, right? None of the most important questions have simple answers. It's all complicated. So someone could, pick a different path. And I know that, I was born in in India to, native parents, that I probably wouldn't be Jewish, right? So that's just the truth of it. So I think you want to pick a path, and for me, Judaism is that path, and and it's I could say it's one of the most ancient wisdom traditions still existing in this world. It's 3,000 years old and it's still alive. Okay, that's a point, but that's not. I think if people experience it as having value and meaning, then they'll want to participate. And if they don't experience it as have value and meaning, then they won't want to participate. And if the only way Judaism can survive is by being shut off from the modern world, I don't want to be part of that Judaism, because I think that, as much as those people think my Judaism is this distortion of Judaism, I think 100% that their Judaism is not the way the traditional, there weren't thousands of people studying Talmud all day before in history. It just never happened, right? So even the traditional world is not what the traditional world was. It changed, for good, for bad, whatever. But I believe fundamentally in a Judaism that is really open to the world. I think it's a challenge. I also think it's an opportunity. It's not just this is where we're living. People are into marrying. What are you going to do about it? I don't see it that way. I see it's every world has has both challenges and opportunities. The medieval world certainly had challenges, maybe some opportunities,
But let me ask another one, just to follow up to that, to Lucy's question. Do you think the Jewish people have a unique mission in the world?
No, I think, partly, I'm somewhat, I'm a Reconstructionist, and, I agree with Kaplan's understanding that chosen people can too easily lead to we're better than they are. You weren't, a special mission doesn't have to be chosen, right? It could,
Right.
you could see it
That's
somewhat.
why I phrased it
Yeah.
that.
Look, I think we all have this mission, right? Which is, I put it in the end of what I said, is to continue to unroll the Torah. It's to continue the work of creation. God's creation isn't finished, and I think we are, and I think all human beings are co-creators, and we have a job to do. And obviously today the job is really clear, right? The world is in danger of ending, so which wasn't really true before modern times. So I think everyone in the world has that responsibility. We may approach these things with the wisdom and practices or teachings of Judaism, and might point us in a certain direction in terms of what could be a solution. But I think broadly it's we're all on a journey to the promised land, and like in the Torah itself, like they only get to the end of Deuteronomy, they never cross over. We never read the book of Joshua, right? We're always on the journey, and the question is how well you did the journey, and whether you made the world better. And I think the call for us is to try and be like God, who said at the end of each day of creation, Ki Tov, it was good. So you want to be able to say, I did good today, knowing that there'll be days that you won't be able to say it, but that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. And the Torah begins, there are no Jews for the first, 12 chapters, 11 chapters, right? Which is a very humbling lesson that Jews aren't essential for the existence of the world. And we need to remember that. And we need to hold both the particularism, which I don't think it can be just universal, but there is both the particular and the universal in Judaism, and we're supposed to hold that tension and struggle with it.
There's a lot of questions in the chat, so
Right,
I
so we
think we
need to
should
get to
turn to
that.
those. And Elaine,
So,
you're doing that, yeah.
Lucy, I was thinking to give you and Chuck a minute to look at the questions, because the two of you are going to be asking some of them, and just announce that Jerry Garfinkel put in where you can get the book and some links and the links to the 3 places you can get the book. Back to you.
So you want us to comb through the questions and
Yeah.
which ones jump out? Like, how does Israel fit into disrupted?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, Judaism Disrupted.
Yeah, so
Short
right.
question. Whew.
Right. Good thing you didn't pick a hard one. Look, I'll be honest, I was debating like, oh, do I really have something to say about Israel? Or it could have been I was saying, well, if I say this, then those people won't buy the book. And if I say the other, then the other people won't buy the book, right? But I also felt like if I didn't have a chapter about Israel in the book, then people would say, oh, he didn't have a chapter about Israel in the book. Like, we know what he thinks. So I do have a chapter about Israel. In the beginning of the chapter, I say, which is be my answer to the question. One answer to the question, which is, I think there needs to be a Judaism Disrupted but it has to be created by Israelis. You have to be living there. You know, it'd be not just chutzpahdik, it'd just be ridiculous for me, who's living here, who visited Israel many times, but, you know, is not living there, to try and create a disrupted Judaism in Israel. And I also think that the world these Israelis live in are very different than the world of American Jews. I mean, I don't mean the political, I don't mean the you know, the Palestinian Arab question, but, you know, Jews are a majority in that country. We are a small minority in our country. That is a fundamental difference about the world. And of course, Israel, the Jews, they all speak Hebrew. They all know every Jewish holiday, even the ones most American Jews have never heard of, right? Because that's their calendar. So, you know, it's a conversation that Lucy and I can have, like, in terms of, you know, can you have a secular Judaism successfully in America? But I'd say you could probably have a secular Judaism successfully in Israel, because the culture is so rich and Jewish and Hebrew and unfolding. I think the tragedy in Israel is that religious stuff is mostly in the hands of the Orthodox, and until recently, most secular Israelis thought there was nothing in the tradition that was of value, and the tradition was represented by those people who, you know, didn't serve in the army, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not making those arguments. I'm just saying how, you know, people would see it. I think the question that I can't answer is, you know, what should American Jewry's relationship to Israel be? Clearly, we're at a critical junction. I wrote the chapter on Israel before all that, and my best answer in that chapter was to say, you know, and somewhat like I said just a few ago, I think we still, Israeli Jews and American Jews, still share the vision of the prophets, which is that everyone should be able to sit under their fig tree and no one shall make them afraid. And we're both far from that. And it's not clear, like, how we can really communicate in ways that we really hear each other, and not go, you know, more and more separate ways. But you know, what I'm really about is what the book is about, is creating, re-envisioning an American Judaism. That's my task.
There are several questions about education, such as how do we educate ourselves and the youngest Jews to be able to make these choices thoughtfully and competently. So, but there is another question similar to that.
Yeah, boy, these are really. What about the easy, you know, baseball right down the middle of the plate?
Yeah, come on, yes, you know.
So, look, you know, that's a hard question. You know, I had a Hebrew day school education, and you know, part of, I feel blessed that I had a really deep Jewish education, which has enabled me to you know, write the books that I've written. That is, and in some ways, even though I talked about the catalog, it was the why, and this book is the catalog was the how, and this book is the why. I realized recently that I'm actually doing the same thing with this book. I'm translating the richness that I know of and learned about in Judaism that most people have never had access to to make it accessible. So, you know, and the mezuzah again is just an example of, oh, wait, like here's this tradition, you know, it's not bad, it's not good, you know, oh, here's a way of making something out of it that I think can be meaningful. And, you know, there is a variety of things in the book. I mean, you know, the book is both for the people on the margins, I hope, and for people, many of you, I think, are involved in Jewish learning, involved in Farbrengen, but there are, you know, sources and traditions that, you know, even most Orthodox people haven't heard of that are in the book, you know, so which is a partial answer is, again, this, I think if people experience the tradition of wisdom, whether it's practices or, wow, this is a text that's really helpful in talking about change, or this is a text that's really helpful about like, oh, like satisfaction, like, well, that's a nice teaching that helps me, you know, I'm going to carry that with me because I struggle with not being jealous of, you know, other people. They get things I don't get. They get asked to speak in places, whatever it is, whatever the issue is, right? So is there, you know, wisdom teachings as well as practices that help me? And then I think people will want to engage more and learn more, right? So one of the 10 core principles, number 10 is Torah study. And I talk about it, it's really a lifelong enterprise. You never graduate from Torah study. There's no like, oh, I learned it all, right? I mean, partly because you couldn't learn it all, but that's not the notion. And I think actually one of the things I've reflected about talking about Kavarat Shalom, the intentional community we're part of, is that it modeled a kind of learning which was spiritual, which you not only learned try to understand what the text was teaching, but you brought yourself to the text. And it was the conversation between those things. And we took our time. So I like to say it was kind of a meditative form of study. And it's not about acquiring knowledge. It's not to learn, okay, here's how to do things. It's really being in relationship to the text. And the last thing I'll say, which I think both connected to this and to earlier, that, you know, I didn't plan it to be, this number of core principles. It just sort of worked out. And for a long time, there were 10. And I realized I had to add an 11th, which is community, which comes back to, you know, earlier question, that Judaism isn't about reaching nirvana yourself, or, you know, I like to say that love your neighbor as yourself, which is part of the holiness code, right? Which, you know, so it's an aspect of holiness. You know, it's really easy to love your neighbor yourself if you don't have any neighbors, right? If you don't live near anybody, it's like a really easy commandment. If you live near people, it's one of the most difficult commandments, right? But Judaism is lived in community, both in that and the way we interact with all the different kinds of people in our lives, but also, you know, that, you know, prayer, coming together, you know, on Shabbat, we come together as a community. And maybe we have to find different forms for coming together on Shabbat, because I wonder whether prayer doesn't work for too many people. But I do think there is a value of coming together, of community. And in that community, I think we learn from each other. But the bottom line if the question is, well, how should people learn if they don't go to a day school, if they go to Hebrew schools, et cetera, those are hard questions. Though, because I think we're still struggling with models that seem effective. But I do think nobody's going to want to study if they feel like what they're studying has no value, and whether that's a kid, or it's an adult. And I think I think there already is more adult learning, and I think there'll be more of that, because adults can make a choice like, hey, I'm interested, I want to do it. And I just make that choice. All right, next question. Easy question.
What, me to take-
Kidding, just kidding.
Chuck, should I go or?
Here's one. Can you then make a case for choosing a Jewish path as part of one's Jewish inheritance, which presupposes some kind of pride in that?
Yeah, maybe I'm not fully understanding that. Look, I think, I'm proud about being Jewish. Like, I don't think pride is the same thing as feeling, I'm better, or we're better, or, oh, look at all the Jewish Nobel Prize winners. Like, obviously we're smarter than everybody, like, not so much. But I do think you can feel pride. I just feel deeply connected to Judaism, to the Jewish world. I mean, that's my story. That's not everybody's story. And for me, that's the thing. I feel really connected to this. This is kind of the language I speak. This is the sea I swim in. And I'm very interested. Like I've read a bunch of books by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist spiritual meditation. There's great stuff there, and I'm happy to learn from any place. Again, because I don't think we have any kind of monopoly, and sometimes it can be an inspiration. Oh, like, yes, and there's something in Judaism that kind of is another reflection of that. Or, oh, this teaching of the Sfat Emet sounds a lot like, the Dalai Lama, whoever, right? I don't feel threatened by outside stuff. I mean, again, partly I think my biography is I come from a deeply Jewish place, so that makes it easier. I rarely worried about, is this what I'm doing authentically Jewish? Partly because I think if you want to be connected to the Jewish tradition, even if you don't know as much as I do, and you're doing it with that kavanah, that intention, okay, so, I might think that doesn't work for me, or, if you knew more, you could do it differently, but I think it's all about placing yourself in the Jewish story. If you want to place yourself in the Jewish story, then you're part of the Jewish people, and your interest is in continuing that story, and that's fine. I mean, that's my understanding. There's an oft-told tale of Moses in the classroom of Rabbi Akiva. Every liberal rabbi quotes this text. So Moses is in the back of and he's listening to Akiva teach. Rabbi Akiva is one of the Talmudic rabbis many centuries later, and Moses doesn't understand a word of what's going on. So he just like, and then Akiva says, and the thing I just taught, this was a teaching given to Moses at Sinai. So instead of saying, you liar, I'm Moses, I was there, I never heard that, you made it up, come on, like, I'm the source. Moses is happy, and I think Moses is happy because even though it's clearly the tradition is different, right? He understands that Akiva is placing himself in the chain of Torah that began with Moses, continues with Akiva, and will continue generations down. And if Akiva showed up on this Zoom, he would say, what the hell are these people talking about? Right. But that I think is the key. You know, you want to be part of it. That's basically good enough.
So one of the ways I think a lot of us can learn is, I repeat this, is to subscribe to your weekly commentaries, which are full of these kinds of stories. So we'll put that in the chat again for everybody. I mean, in addition to buying your book, but which of course this is about as well. But
yeah, look, if I could just jump, I mean, and now there's so many opportunities to study online.
Right.
And it's just a question of finding, you know, the right teacher and the right subject that you're interested in. And there's, you know, there's this wonderful resource, which, you know, not so much for people who are not conversant in these texts, but Sefaria, there's this website that has basically all the classic Jewish texts. Some of them have been translated, but I suggest in the book, actually, I put a study guide, I created a study guide for my book and posted it on Sefaria. So if you want to teach my book, there's a study guide, you know, ready-made for you. But also, what people do on Sefaria is create source sheets. So if you, let's say you wanted to study Judaism and humility, you could go to Sefaria, put that humility in, and up could come a bunch of source sheets. Most of those have the Hebrew and the translation, and you could have, you know, study yourself or with a friend. Like, oh, it just makes those things which are curated completely accessible to anybody. So even if you're only reading it in English, you never look at the Hebrew, it's, you know, it's, as a word Greek to you, it could give you, oh, here's a sense of what the tradition has to say about this. I like this teaching. I think this teaching is crazy, you know, not whatever. And there are other, you know, books like that. I mean, books, not just the website. They're trying to make this things accessible.
So you're answering a lot of questions that are in the chat, and
Good.
that's great. But here's another easy one for you. So much of what you've been talking about are the pull factors, what makes us want to identify as Jews, to practice aspects of Judaism in the modern world. But historically, for almost as long as Jews have been around, the push factor is anti-Semitism, is that the world has disliked us and a whole lot worse. And that's what caused many Jews to continue to affiliate and identify with Judaism in response to that external pressure and hatred. How does that fit into your thinking and into the book?
Yeah, you know, I think things have changed in the last, you know, decade or maybe less. You know, I was always, you know, growing up, I didn't, you know, there are people that are worried about anti-Semitism. There are people that are not worried about anti-Semitism. I was not worried. You know, when I grew up in Boston, I used to ride the Boston subway system to go to my day school in Brookline. I was the only person wearing a kippah on, you know, the Boston subway, you know, and there were occasional incidents, whatever. But, you know, in a sense, it looked like that was an old story. It looked like we were moving to a more open world. And, you know, in the last couple of years, including, you know, right now, the trial in Pittsburgh, and it's, you know, I think it would be foolish to not say this is a problem rather than just, you know, one or two crazy people. I still think we live in a much more open world than our ancestors did, and where you're right. It wasn't just a point. It was like no choice, right? And even for much of the modern period, it was clear, like, oh, he's a Jew, right? Like there was, I mean, even in the beginning of the 20th century in America, anti-Semitism was still serious in terms of workplace, and someone like Father Coughlin, having like thousands of followers and being public radio. So, that changed after the Holocaust, and I think it's somewhat unclear, and everybody can have their opinion where it's going to be in 20 years. I wouldn't venture to say. As I said, I think people have to be realistic, but I think in any case, where we want to live in a world where that isn't true, and we want to move towards that world, right? And people debate. I mean, I've heard recent things that there are some scholars who are questioning, some of this, not the numbers of the ADL statistics, but is it as big as a problem as it seems to be, or is it not as big a problem? And I don't want to have that conversation. I don't have any wisdom on that. But yeah, it's a problem. There's no answer. But I'm trying to create a world where that wouldn't be a problem, right? And I just saw something in the here that, and if you want to take some classes, there's a thing called the Jewish Study Center, which isn't far, and they have lots of classes, and you should do that. And as we heard, it's free, and you just can make a donation. So definitely check it out. So, another question.
Chuck, do you want it?
We have still a little time, so.
Yeah, we're drawing from the chat now, just for the record.
Yeah, I just try. There was one here I skipped over, and I'm looking for. There was a question about conversion. How does your approach affect people who touch people who are considering conversion to Judaism? How would you?
Yeah. So my wife was a Rabbi Joy Levitt. She's actually involved. She's retired from the JCC in Manhattan, and she's very involved in a project related to conversion, which is to really encourage conversion, make it easy rather than difficult. And she would, in some ways, follow Hillel. You may know there's this another oft-quoted rabbinic story where someone comes to Hillel and Shammai, this rabbinic pair. Some guy comes to Shammai and says, teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. And Shammai says, get out of here, so the same person goes to Hillel, and so the way everybody remembers it is, he says, love, the equivalent of love your neighbor as yourself. Now go study. But actually, and it's a series, there are two other such stories of converts. I won't give you all the details. It's a great text. I love teaching it. But what's remarkable is in each of those cases, Hillel converts the person. And then he says, go study, and and each. So he converts them right away, which is not the tradition as done. But Hillel's not like some wacko rabbi, living in no place. Like, he's a big guy. So, I don't know. I'm sure scholars have some answer and traditional scholars have a different answer. I think their answer is, no, they study and it's a year later or something like that. I agree a lot with my wife. I think we want to make it easy. And again, it goes back to what I said. People want to convert, want to be part of the Jewish story, right? That's what they're coming for. There may be, they're marrying someone that's Jewish. There may be some factors there, but one of the things that's changed in my years of the rabbinate is that at the beginning there would be people who would come, couple non-Jew, and the Jew would say, well, my parents or my grandparents really want the non-Jew to convert. In the last years of my rabbinate, that never happened. And I think it was, and in a funny way, good and bad ways, it was felt like it's not right to make someone convert. They really have to do it because they want to, not because, right? So if the grandparents felt fine about doing that, the parents of the bride and groom, in the beginning maybe, but now it's shifted and people just won't do that. Though at times, I think people are too hesitant, and I've seen cases where, there's a couple that have been living together for a long time, and and my wife said, "Oh, would you like to convert?" And she said, "Yeah, no, like we belonged to a synagogue for 10 years and no one asked us. I would be happy to become Jewish. Like, we have this Jewish life, we're living this." And so I think we shouldn't be afraid to ask. And even as I accept that we certainly don't want to be in a situation of coercion, not conversion. And Joy's trying to think of a different word. She doesn't particularly like the word conversion. So you can send suggestions. But that's my answer, I guess. What else? We get near the end, but
There's a question. Someone wanted to know why you're forward. It was in honor of Sylvia Burstein. You may want to just describe who she is. Not everyone on the call may know who she is or her influence among a number of rabbis.
Right. So there's an amazing number of American Buddhist teachers are of Jewish origin, let us say. And most of them have very little connection to their Judaism. Sylvia Boorstein is one of the exceptions. She is a meditation teacher. She was very instrumental in starting Spirit Rock, which is a meditation center in Northern California. And I won't tell you, there came about a retreat it was about 10 rabbis with Sylvia Boorstein and Sheila Weinberg, who was a Reconstructionist rabbi, to have a 3-day silent meditation retreat for rabbis, at a retreat center. And for probably all of us, not Sheila, but I think it was a real introduction to meditation. I joked that I went to see a number of the rabbis not talk for 3 days. You can picture
lots of jokes about that, I'm sure.
Yeah. What?
Lots of jokes about that.
Yeah. And it was a really important experience for me. Sylvia remained a teacher. She was involved in the founding of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And all this time, even before this, she belonged to a synagogue in California. She went regularly. So, I thought, both she's my teacher and a friend and a wonderful person. And I thought she'd be a good person to do introduction. Her name, she's not in the most famous of the American Buddhist teachers, but she's known, somewhat. And I thought that would be, good for the book, to be honest, but also she's a good friend, and she was an important influence, I think, for through IJS, where she taught for a number of years, the Rabbi retreats on Judaism and this intersection of Judaism and spirituality. So that's I kind of assume we won't have a conversation. I assume the person asking may know Sylvia's name not from the Jewish world. But.
So thank you. Thank you, Michael. And I'm just going to end this part before we do a closing, although this you can stay on and talk some more informally after 8:30. But I just want to say that one of the things that's so intriguing is the way you end the book, where you say that the 613th commandment is that every person in Israel should write their own Torah. And that was how it was done in a certain way then, but you're encouraging all of us to write to take part in writing a new Torah. Do you want to comment on that?
I would just want to, not just writing a new Torah, which, yes, but in a funny way, I think it's the one commandment that every Jew fulfills. Most Jews don't know they're fulfilling the commandment, because I think the Torah we write is the story of our lives. Yeah. And we write it with our deeds and our misdeeds. And then we pass that Torah on to when we leave this world, to the people that loved us and cared for us, and friends, and that Torah will be continued to be read, as long as memories keep it alive, and just quickly, there's a Hasidic teaching that every Jew has one letter of the Torah. Supposedly there were 600,000 Jews at Sinai and 600,000 letters in the Torah. Each of those are correct, and of course the 600,000 Jews leaves out all the women at Sinai. Okay, but so ignoring that, and in this teaching, it's the Netivot Shalom. The Slonim Rebbe says, and a Torah that's missing one letter is pasul. You can't read from it in the synagogue. It's it's not kosher Torah. And he suggests, and I suggest, that without many thousands of Jews, our Torah is incomplete. And that comes back to what Lucy was saying, right? That we each write our own Torah, but the community together has to write the Torah for our times, which is the old written Torah, but the oral Torah is what each of us brings to it. There's one of the commentaries say the Torah is black fire on white fire, and that image is a powerful image of, it's not static, it doesn't stay the same, like fire quivers, and there's all the white spaces, and what are those saying, right? And last is last image, I throw all this in, is, we sing every week in synagogue, Eitz Chaim, the Torah is a tree of life, right? And trees grow and change. If you kept the tree exactly the same, it would die. And that's our task and our opportunity. So thank you. And I'm happy to stay a little while.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that and just flew with it. That was wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Chevra. And Sue, you.
yeah. So, yeah, thank you, Lucy and Chuck and Michael and Jerry, all of us. I just wanted to say that in the great Jewish tradition, I think we're left with a lot of knowledge from this wonderful discussion and your wonderful presentations and questions. And I think we're left with just as many questions, which is the way, isn't it?
And the book.
By the book. And also, Jerry put something in the chat about if you have ideas for programs. There were so many wonderful questions in the chat room. Thank you all for attending and for your wonderful questions. And, we can pick up on this. The Jewish Studies Center can pick up on continuing discussion. Fabrengen and its speaker series can pick up on continuing the discussion. So please stay in touch to continue the discussion. And with that, I think Jerry's going to say a final goodbye and any directions for staying on if you want. Jerry?
You're muted.
I'll mute myself first, I guess. It would help a little bit. Let me first give my own 1.5 cent interpretation of Michael's book. It's how to make your own Jewish path to goodness. That's what I think of your book. I want to thank everyone, especially, of course, Michael Strassfeld for, agreeing to come and explain things to us, and Lucy and Chuck for doing all the stuff you were doing, and Elena Rodriguez, who has been helping with some technical aspects, letting people in, et cetera, and especially Sue for, doing the speaker series and allowing us to be part of that, and thanking for bringing it in general. As far as the study center is concerned, we have no classes right now scheduled. We are working on a few classes, especially some classes about the Jews of Iran. That's in the process, and Jews of Iraq is going to come through soon, and probably Jews of Portugal. And if you have any topic that you would like us to present, or maybe you'd like to present the topic yourself, email us at info@jewishstudycenter.org, and we'd be glad to discuss that with you. Or maybe you might want to suggest someone to give a class. Some of our best classes come that way. So again, thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure having all of you people there, and also the Fabrengen speaker series, and all of you. Thank you very much.
And Jerry, people can stay on if they want?
If they want to, yes.
Michael will stay on for a little bit, you said, right, Michael?
Yeah.
And I will as well. And anybody else who wants to. This was great. Thanks a lot.
Also allow people to unmute themselves if they want to.
Great.
Maybe people should raise their hands instead of unmuting. That way we'll, whatever.
You can raise your hand, or you can do it.
I think I answered every single question. There's nothing left.
You raise your hand physically, or raise your hand via the reactions button at the bottom.
I see a bunch of hands, so. Someone want to call?
So Sarah Schendelman first, then Burl, then Barbara and Howard, then Alan J. Weisberg. Can you remember the order? Go, Sarah. You have to
You have to unmute, Sarah. Unmute.
Wait.
Oh, do you have to unmute them?
Well,
Yep, she's unmuted.
I was getting blocked. Yes, I was unmuting the whole time. I was still mute. So Michael, I've been enjoying hearing you talk about the book, especially since I'm bedridden after this accident. You might wonder why I've got so much time. It's just amazing to me how much I totally agree with everything you are saying. And it just occurred to me, I would ask one question, which is, people come to me for conversion. If you're converting somebody and you're as I am, and whoever is not unmuted and is talking over me, stop.
Yes, if you're not speaking, I mean, if you're not Sarah, please mute.
Okay.
Or Michael.
Thank you. So people come to me for conversion, and then I'll get a baked in of 2 other independent rabbis. But what would you just, on the back of a napkin, make the priorities? And how long would you suggest that this person study?
Look, I when I was in the congregation, I would send, there was a class in New York or more than one class I would send them to, and I would meet with them a couple of times. As I say, my wife Joy is going in a different direction. She thinks, welcome, come join, and and after that, what do you want to study, and how do you want to do that? Or maybe you feel, I'm not ready, and doing some studying will make you feel ready. You can imagine that too. So she's in a kind of radical place about, and to the extent that study is a lifelong enterprise. Look, and I think it's the same thing about, kids study. And I was just talking to someone who's, a rabbi who's rethinking about, redoing the whole bar mitzvah, b mitzvah, and what the kid does, and what and saying, like, it's the same kind of question. Is it really useful to learn how to read Torah and half Torah, or is there other things that would be more important, and the kid might carry with them, right, than skills that most kids are never going to use again. So maybe that would be the place to start. Like, what do you feel like you need to know? Because I think one of the challenges with people converting is they worry about feeling authentic. Will I ever be accepted by Jews? And B, will I feel authentic? Right. And in some ways, that's my understanding of that Hillel text. The truth is, I want to learn the Torah standing on one foot, and the other ones, the other 2 cases are just as ridiculous. I think what's happening there is Hillel understands what they're saying is just about they're nervous. We've all had, whether as therapists or rabbis, people come and ask a question, and after 20 minutes you realize that's not the question. The real question is, right? So I think they're all come up with ridiculous things because they're nervous, and they're saying, like, if I go through this thing, am I really going to be accepted, right? So you have to, hear the question behind the question. So what do they want to know? I think that's what I would say, thinking about it. I mean, I think it's a really interesting question.
I've done independent bar and bat mitzvahs for 30 years, and I want to make the student comfortable enough with some traditional melodies, though I prefer mostly Jewish renewal, so that if they walk into any regular synagogue, they won't feel like an ignoramus. They won't have a reason to not want to step into that community. And I just try and give them a love for Judaism. But I would really like to be in touch with that person you said is thinking about the bar bat mitzvah process.
Yeah, I'll send you the name. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Burl's next. And then Barbara or Howard, then Alan, then Mindy, then Elaine. I think that your hand is up.
Thank you, Rabbi Strassfeld, for your wonderful presentation. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm glad what you said about rituals and things like that. I'm physically disabled. I'm from West Virginia. My parents are Jewish, but I was excluded from a Jewish education, basically because I am unable to walk stairs, and like my synagogue that my great grandfather helped found in West Virginia was not wheelchair accessible. So once I got too heavy to be carried up and down the stairs, I was the end of my Jewish education as a child, pretty much. But I was wondering, it seemed like you had your book will have advice on how to feel spiritual and be a quote unquote good Jew. But I didn't know if you had any other advice. I mean, because I'm basically, for much of my life, I'm alone. I'm isolated. I care about learning, but I've got a lot of things to take care of my disability and just trying to survive. And I often feel very spiritual, but I don't know if I'm just crazy that way. But I don't know if you have any thoughts for me as a disabled person who would like to, feel close to God. I do believe in God. Especially the more alone I feel as my parents age. They live in a different state. But I'm looking for kind of like any kind of spiritual pep talk or guidance along the way if you have any quick advice. So.
Right. So the questions only get harder, right?
Yeah.
So look, I don't know you, but I would encourage you not to, I forget exactly how you put it, like about, I feel spiritual, but I don't know. Did you say I don't know if it's real or you're fooling yourself? Like,
yeah.
So like, I would have more faith in yourself, right? Like, there's no reason. I mean, I don't know what. In other words, if the criteria is, do I hear the voice of God speaking to me personally? So I could tell you, I've never heard the voice of God speaking to me personally, right? So, or, I had some experience that I felt, oh my God, this is, clearly something other is going on, right? It doesn't have to be a voice saying like, Michael, tie your shoe, but, I think it is something about trust, that it feels to be trust that your experience is real and, and not, and accept it as a gift, to
Thank you.
And really, like, your life has many challenges, but it's, I think some of it is to find the gifts. I'm not saying to see the disability as a gift, no, but there are still pieces of your life that are, gifts, whether it's, your parents and maybe the people that you feel, or, the ability to look out your window and, and see nature, and whatever that is. And in some ways it's to hold on to those.
And just to add, Burl is a very welcome and active member for Brengen and a very accomplished professional as well. So there's lots there.
Well, I'm glad that Brengen has been so accessible to me. I haven't found that experience in a lot of my other encounters with Jewish institutions, but for Brengen is
but then that sense of connection here is like really, important and a blessing, right?
Thank you.
Barbara or Howard, I don't know.
Let me just mention though, Farrell is also a very active member of the Jewish Study Center. So even with all the disabilities, really does get around and accomplish things and helps many people.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah.
Okay,
Hi.
long time, yes.
Yeah,
One, I want to do two things. One, I remember at one of the first institutes that I went to, you led Havdalah, and you specifically took out all the dualities that are in the middle of that Havdalah. So that's something you thought about for a long time, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know I took them all out, but certainly, Israel and the nations, like.
Yeah,
No.
you took all of them out.
Oh, okay. I was more radical than what.
And the second thing is one thing that I think that you should watch out for. You talked about the 25 guys that were starting Judaism. I put a question in the chat. Judith Hoffman has done an article and work on the fact where women were involved, even where they weren't the rabbis that were involved. I think it's important that this was a community that started Judaism, and that we don't want to just make it 25 guys, that we want to include the women and the others that were part of that community, because I think it wouldn't have happened with just a few guys sitting off, despite Rabbi Akiva running off by himself. But most of them were married, and their wives had an important part of it.
Well, thanks. I didn't know about that. I would like to read that. I'll find the source, because that would be interesting.
I've heard
Because
it about it. I didn't read the source. So.
Yeah, no, it's good. I definitely trust that Judy Hauptman is not making it up. But that's great. Thank you. Right. And yeah, I don't have to, but thanks. I'd be interested. I know there are other things, like we know that there were women who had like the equivalent of president of the synagogue in ancient times. That where that was a big surprise, that there would be women in official roles in the synagogue, not leading the services, but just in the structure of the synagogue. There's a word for it, I don't remember. But thanks for, and nice to see you guys.
And Alan, and then Mindy Reiser.
Michael, in 1971, I was in Israel. I was very excited with Zionist thought. I came back to Boston and appeared at Havrat Shalom in early 1972. I learned from you and a number of your colleagues. My family subsequently moved to Washington and were participants in Fabregan. We subsequently moved to Montclair, where our rabbi was Joy Levitt. And my adult life has been one of committed Jewish study. I think it has been central to giving my life meaning and purpose, in addition to my career work. The fullness of feeling as this book comes out on the 50th anniversary of the catalogs and of those experiences for me really highlight how grateful I am to you, to Joy, to a number of other participants in this event who were friends 40 and 50 years ago. And I must say, I do a lot of theological thinking and have come to conclusions that are extraordinarily close to those that you're articulating in the book and in your comments tonight. And I just want to express my gratitude to you for adding so much to my life and my life as a Jew. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's a beautiful tribute, and it's good to see you again too. Mindy Reiser is next.
No, I'll have Phyllis. Phyllis had her hand up before Mindy did actually.
Apologies, Mindy, you'll be after Phyllis then.
I just wanted to say that anybody who hasn't read Sylvia Boorstein's books has such a treat in store for them because she is such a good writer, and two of her titles are Don't Just Stand There, Sit, which means sit to meditate, and Funny, You Don't Look Buddhist. And she's an observant Jew who elucidates these Buddhist principles that any of us could possibly relate to. And my Rosh Chodesh group went to New York City when she traveled from California and did a meditation with her in New York City, and it was something memorable. So thank you for mentioning her in your book.
Those books, they're, some of the Buddhist teachers most of them are very accessible, but some, particularly when they get into doctrine, it's like, and she's very good at that, and she spends a lot of time on her titles. She loves to have like clever titles, so it's so that's great. I'm glad you experienced her. She's really a special person. Thanks. Mindy, I guess, is next.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, good. This was phenomenal. Words really of rich profundity and humor. It was the world, and everybody contributed to that. I wanted to follow up. I originally asked a question, which Lucy was nice enough to pose, about how Israel figures in all of this.
Yeah.
And right now I review books. I do a lot of reading. I'm a writer and a social scientist, and I'm reading a book called The Golden Land and the Holy Land. And it's talking about American Jewish life at the end of the Ottoman Empire and the relationship to Israel. The point that I want to make here is that American Jews were so pivotal in establishing the Technion, in the Bezalel Institute, and forming the institutions that comprise a lot of the richness of Israel. So the question here is, what do we make of Zionut, of Zionism? How does that figure in how you look at the corpus of Jewish life and history and contemporary Jewish life? A number of our major Jewish institutions are focused on Zionut, on taking the kids to the trips to Israel, which I would bet do not present the whole picture by any means. But that is a pivotal leg of American Jewish life. What do you make of it? Where do we go? And how do we handle the incredible complexity of Palestinian life and future and culture?
Oh, great. We got the most difficult question for last. Look, at this moment, it's hard to see what the future is going to be. It's very hard to see how this is going to work out. And to take a step back for a second, I think in some ways, parts of the American Jewish community, particularly the organizational life, which you kind of alluded to in a way, has for decades been focused on Israel. Sort of in some ways, the Federation world. So initially they were helping Jews in need around the world, and then they were helping Jews in need in Israel and helping Israel. And what I'm trying to say was it was a kind of outer directed form of Judaism, right? I don't know how much they were doing themselves. Most of the Federation Jews were kind of secular in their orientation. I always wondered whether that outward focus would be enough to carry over to next generations. I mean, there's another similar question, but different, which is the impact of the Holocaust on American Jewish life has been enormous. It's hard to see how that will be true in 25 years. I just don't see it. And so and that comes back to something I said to Lucy earlier on. Like for me, I'm a religious, spiritual Jew, whatever word you want to use, and I think that what Judaism needs to be about, in a broad way, defined in a broad way, that. And I just wonder whether these other things are enough to sustain Jewish life. And I think, look, I think the big question here, and I'm talking about stuff that I feel like I don't particularly have a lot of wisdom about. So let me just say that. I think that the question is, what is Zionism after the state exists? So Ben-Gurion basically said to the American Zionists, you all have to come here. What does it mean to be a Zionist when, in America is supporting the state of Israel? Come here, move here. I don't want to deal. He basically wanted to write off the American Zionist organizations as, before the state, you're working to make the state. Now the state exists. There's no excuse. Just come. And if you don't come, you're not really joining us in this enterprise. I don't really care about, you're not really Zionist anymore. I don't know if he said exactly like that, but that didn't work out. That as people didn't, some people came, but many people didn't. And I think it's somewhat unanswered question. What does Zionism mean after the state exists and you're living in the United States? There's another question, which I think is part of what the argument is about these days, is what does Zionism mean in the state of Israel? Is that an ideology that translates into policy for the state? And if it does, well, is it the policy of the left wing or the policy of the right wing? But I think that's a question also, right? What does it mean to be a Zionist? And I think for some Israelis, I'm an Israeli. I'm not a Zionist. I'm Israeli. I live in this country, and this is my country. And we're here. That's beginning and end of it. So I think these are difficult questions that I think don't have obvious answers. And I think partly for that reason, the Jewish community doesn't discuss them much, because it feels uncertain about what don't want to rock the boat. But at this moment, the boat is really rocking. And I think, again, I'm not an expert here. I don't know what I'm an expert on, but definitely not this. I think, depending what happens in the next couple of months, maybe, the question may be very different or be seen differently by people. So I think it's in some ways, let me end with this. In some ways, not having an answer to the question didn't matter so much, because we kind of stumbled along with the way things were, sort of, and it was okay enough, right? And people had different ideas about Israeli policy, whatever, but okay. But, it feels like now there's lines in the sand and, either this direction or that direction, and that seem kind of mutually exclusive. And so I think it's a tough time. And I think it'll be a tough time in the American Jewish community. One of the things I argue for in the book, my article, in the chapter on Israel, is let's try and hold everybody in. Let's not be quick to say, oh, people with those views, they're outside the consensus. People that with these views, they're outside the consensus, right? And I say, I make the point, first of all, the period where all American Jews were Zionists, which never exactly was true in any case, was a very short period, beginning with the '67 war and, maybe 20 years later. There were plenty of people, American Jews, who were non-Zionist, anti-Zionist, in the beginning of the 20th century, in all the movements, not just the Reform movement. And the truth is, the largest group of Hasidim today, the Satmar Hasidim, are anti-Zionist. There are many Hasidim who are non-Zionist. That means they're not anti, but they're not pro. But Satmar is anti-Zionist. And nobody's saying we should write Satmar out of the Jewish community, the way they're saying that people with these views about Israel and the West Bank, they're out, and these people, whatever. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that Satmar's in, but I don't think it helps anybody to I think we want to draw those lines broadly rather than narrowly. Yes, there's always somebody who's outside, people say, well, Jews for Jesus. Okay, so they're outside the consensus, but these people who are really critical of Israel, they're outside the consensus. Why do that? But it feels look, the world is very parallel. The world in America and the world in Israel, it's like things are becoming very divided, and rather than sharing a vision, a larger vision together. And that may be the great challenge of this period, both here and there.
I think
on that gloomy note,
no, we'll pick it up another time, I hope. Thank you very, very much. Jerry, do you want to have a final word here?
Just that I would disagree with Michael that this gloomy note. I think it was a very interesting, answer you gave. It gave me some more thoughts. So I would be more optimistic about yourself and less negative. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, I appreciate this opportunity.
Great class.
Closing things.